A year after this film, Intolerance by D.W. Griffith was released. A novel was published called A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It was about a former Confederate soldier named John Carter, thrown improbably into a civil war on the Red Planet. He finds true love in the form of Dejah Thoris, the princess of the title. Many people were enchanted by the tale of a man who could fly thanks to the difference in gravity between the two planets he inhabits. Who wouldn't be? Over the years, many people tried bringing Burroughs' hero to life in the cinema. Animator Robert Clampett asked for the rights, and Burroughs even granted them, but it never came to fruition. Later, producer and stop-motion animator Ray Harryhausen, famous for making magical creatures like these, tried but also failed. Directors like John McTiernan, Robert Rodriguez, and Jon Favreau were all tempted by the tale of John Carter, but in the end, each had to walk away. Finally, in 2008, an animator named Andrew Stanton, famous for films like Wall-E and Finding Nemo, asked for the job. He'd been a fan of the books as a kid. When he realized he might be the only person who could make this movie happen, he jumped at the chance. But something had happened in the years since A Princess of Mars was first put on paper. Motion pictures had begun taking ideas from Burroughs' stories. Technology had come of age very slowly, and in the process, many of the things that made A Princess of Mars so thrilling to readers had lost its novelty. Cinematic spectacle had reached heights that men like Burroughs and D.W. Griffith never lived to see. The idea of a man who can soar through the air and battle fantastical beasts on alien worlds was no longer special. Indeed, it had almost become the norm. American audiences had been to the Mars of Burroughs' imagination. They just didn't know it. Moviegoers felt that they had seen much of John Carter before it arrived, not realizing or caring that many of their favorite fantasy stories wouldn't exist without it. Americans found an old-fashioned adventure story easy to resist. Critics were largely put off by the price tag it had come with. $250 million had been spent on the production, not to mention the years of shoots and reshoots. All that news formed a target that was too easy for some to miss. Many used the budget as a truncheon, walking into the film predisposed to dislike something forged in hubris. Others were put off by the complex mythology of the source material.
The ninth ray must remain in the hands of mindless brutes we can control. And the infamy of Dejah Thoris' wedding death will seal his reign. We've been playing this game since before the birth of this planet, and will continue to do so long after the death of yours.
Even after a decade of fantasy epics like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Avatar, some felt this was simply one fantastic voyage too many. Everyone had their reasons for not liking John Carter. I also know that I'll never forget watching it and realizing for the first time that anything was possible on a movie screen. Stanton and his cast imbue Burroughs' work with a colorful, sensual texture and a sharp wit.
Deal. Go on. Shake it as a sign of trust. Good enough.
In its early stages, it nods its head toward old-fashioned sci-fi yarns like The First Man on the Moon and The Time Machine. Then Carter comes face to face with the alien race that will come to rely on him, and the film becomes something more than just a gripping yarn. It becomes monumental. The aliens, called Tharks, were as real a creation as I'd ever seen. For many years, cinema had been dominated by big computer-generated effects, but until this moment I hadn't really believed any of them. But thanks to a century of technological advancement, special effects now had just the right weight to sell the most fantastic elements of A Princess of Mars. The film is not dependent on its effects. being first and foremost a ripping adventure grounded by an old-fashioned romance and a loving sense of cinematic and mythic history, but I was nevertheless impressed by the uncanny personality given to its CGI characters and objects. For 2 hours, I felt as though I was watching the film that Hollywood had been building towards since the days of Griffith, the film that the story deserved. If Hollywood had pilfered most of A Princess of Mars, John Carter couldn't exist without the technical and grammatical foundation made possible by all the films that had borrowed from it.
Wait! Don't! Stay back!
It's a reflection of Hollywood's better angels, that mythic place famous for telling stories that kids will remember when they've grown old. Watching it, I remembered what it was like seeing my first films in theaters. Repertory screenings of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Treasure Island at the tiny art house cinema up the road from me. Those memories still mean a lot to me, and in the John Carter of Stanton's imagining, I could sense a kindred spirit. I was back in that place where motion pictures were dreams we all shared. Nothing less than magic. John Carter wanted to transport audiences to a place they could only go in the movies. It took almost 100 years to get this film made. For something this spectacular, something that made me remember what it felt like to watch movies as a child, I would gladly have waited longer.